So this afternoon I'm going to talk about my PhD research. This comes out of the James Cook University Medical School, and I did 10 months of fieldwork at Takiwasi, which is an addiction treatment centre in Peru. But the basic aim of the research was to first off understand the treatment, like what it actually is, what goes on there, what happens, and secondly to discover the effects on the patients. The basic model underlying the research is called the biopsychosocial models. But what I did was I took biological samples from the patients, I gave them psychological tests, and also did anthropological fieldwork. So I'm trying to cover a lot of bases. But the main thing here is to understand that health and illness, and therefore addiction and its treatment, can be understood in this terms of, well, there's biological parts, there's psychological parts, and there's a social aspect. And I want to come back to this at the end and criticize it. But for now, this is what I was thinking at the beginning. So Takiwasi, as I said, an addiction treatment centre in Tarapoto, Peru. It's been going for around 25 years, so this is pretty well established centre. Founded by a French doctor named Jacques Mabit. So this is, most famously, the centre combines Western medicine with traditional medicine. That's the sort of claim to fame, if you like. And here's a shot from the inside. If you can see that, that's actually inside. That's where the patients stay. So this is like long-term inpatient treatment. They're staying for up to 9 months, sometimes even longer, sometimes shorter. About 15 patients at a time, so it remains relatively small scale in terms of treatment. And they are, of course, very well known for the use of ayahuasca, and it's started to gain quite a lot of traction in the scientific literature. And it's coming to the attention of Western medicine as well. So you can see that if we're giving mostly drug addicts ayahuasca, we're giving them a substance, a psychoactive substance. The goal is definitely not abstinence in Takiwasi, apart from the aspects of inner healing and this sort of thing. The idea really is to re-establish a correct relationship, or what Takiwasi sees as a correct relationship with plants, with substances, and that is going away from drug use, if you like, towards a more sacramental concept of what we're doing here. Now, one thing I'm going to take a little bit of time to sort of stress is that Takiwasi is not really an ayahuasca centre. I mean, it is, but it's a lot more than that as well. You can identify at least 5 core sort of therapeutic areas: traditional medicine, which I'm going to return to, spiritual practice. It is orientated towards Christianity. There's a chapel there, there's a Catholic priest, and also like a non-denominational meditation hall as well, to cater for people who are not Christian. There's also community life is a rather large aspect of the treatment, and this is things like making food, baking bread, doing yoga, learning how to draw, all these sort of things that have a relationship to just normal life and play a role in going back into society after you leave the therapeutic community. Psychotherapy is mandatory. It's not possible to take part in ayahuasca sessions in Takiwasi without having a psychotherapist assigned to you. That's been that way from the beginning. I think they pioneered that idea. And also Western medicine, which doesn't get a lot of interest, I don't think, from the West, because it's not really anything so interesting for us. It's normal. But it's very important, and I think it's particularly important in an addiction treatment context where you've got a lot of patients with conditions that are not necessarily amenable to traditional medicine. So that's already quite a lot of stuff. You could go into each one and talk a lot about it, but I'll just go into traditional medicine a little bit further. Now, the first traditional technique that a Takiwasi patient would be exposed to, let's say, would be a purga. It's like Purge Plants. Basically, this involves drinking an extract of a plant, usually not psychoactive. There can be a little, but not hugely. And this makes you vomit, and then drink a lot of water, and you vomit again, and you vomit a lot, quite a lot, and it can go for maybe like an hour or something like that. And this happens a lot at Takiwasi. This is actually the thing that goes on the most. And it's considered to be basically a basic preparation for later work with ayahuasca and with plants. It's a cleaning mechanism, which, according to the healers, works on multiple levels, and different plants work for different things. So there's that, and that's going on a lot. This is the purge there. You drink from that orange bucket there, so you're drinking like quite a lot of water. There's also these containment plants, and these are mild plant preparations. They're drunk at night, and there's not a lot of ceremony around this. This is just something that you drink, and it's, again, a preparation for later work with plants. And there's a lot of different reasons why they use different plants. One example is to sort of intensify your dreaming. Start to connect you with that world because you're going to go into that. And in my experience, it really does work. I was expecting it to not work because I don't remember my dreams, and then I started having these crazy, vivid dreams, It really was preparing me for something. So then we move along to ayahuasca, which is the sort of mainline treatment at Takiwasi. This is an image there of the patients all wearing white. Normally you don't see that with there's 2 tracks. There's the inpatient and also people that come for sort of mental health. These would be the patients there. A lot of the treatment material comes up out of this, like the later work psychologically, a lot of it is generated here, a lot of the healing as well. Here's a drawing actually. After every session, the patients write about their experience and also draw pictures. And you can see this is it just struck me because it's so intricate. I think it's great, these guys are coming there. A lot of them don't have a great deal of motivation. And to start really drawing this out, I think is really good. So there's also Ayahuasca, which is something like ayahuasca, but it's mostly vine. There's not much leaf, if any, so there's not much DMT in this brew. But instead of drinking a small little cup of ayahuasca, you're drinking like liters of this foul-tasting stuff. Now, some people get visions out of this, maybe 50-50 when I looked at the data, but it can generate some really intense inner processes, if you like. It can be an important part of the healing process. There's also Temazcal, which is a sweat lodge. That's a North American tradition. And then the dieta as well. So this involves basically isolation in the forest for upwards of a week with very limited food intake, and you're just taking plants. And this is not ayahuasca. Again, they're not necessarily psychoactive, but they're given to a particular patient based on a sort of a perceived need. So the idea of the dieta has really strict behavioral requirements, more strict than with ayahuasca. So it's sort of like a treatment consolidation point. Everything that's come up to that point, it's like an extended meditation on those things that are specific to you, taking the plants that are for you. And there's many different plants. Like this is a list of some of the dieta plants, and they all have different reasons on different levels of action. So I won't go through them, but this is just a bit of an extended discussion to make the point that this connection of traditional medicine and Western medicine is not ayahuasca plus Western medicine. It's its own medical tradition plus Western medicine. Now, who goes to Takiwasi? What sort of patients are going there? Well, during my field work, these were the numbers. You can see there in dark blue, South Americans are the majority of the patients that are there. Quite a few Europeans. That was a bit of an anomaly. Previous years were a lot more South Americans, so it might just have been the year that I was there. And then a few from mostly Central America, a couple from North America. Now, this is a common question that gets asked about Takiwasi. Do these guys even have anything wrong with them? I had 3 supervisors for my PhD, and my pharmacology supervisor was not really into psychedelics and this sort of stuff. And he said, how do we know these guys are not just going there for a drug holiday? Like they're drug addicts and they're going here just to drink ayahuasca. And So what this graph is actually showing is we're trying to quantify the severity of addiction in people. And in the light blue, you've got the average in the United States in a random inpatient treatment center. And in the dark blue, you've got Takiwasi average of all patients that have been measured on this particular test. Higher is worse. You've got worse problems on each particular scale. So medical problems, alcohol problems, legal problems, let's say. If we compare Takiwasi patients with United States patients, they're the same. No statistically significant differences, let's say. When you compare the severity of their problems, as in drug problems, as in family problems and psychiatric problems, you can see like a massive elevation on the Takiwasi patients compared to what you're going to find on average in a United States inpatient treatment center. So this is all to say that we're not dealing with soft cases in general. We're dealing with pretty serious cases, and a lot of the time it's like a last resort for people. What actually happens to them when they're in treatment? Well, we can conceptualize addiction. It's a difficult thing to measure. I can't use that previous test because they're living inside a therapeutic community. Have they got legal problems? No, they're not even living in the community. They're in a center. So we can conceptualize addiction in a negative sense and in a positive sense. So on the left-hand side, these are negative things that tend to be present with addictions. They go hand in hand with addictions. They're prevalent. Stress, craving, usually for a drug, but it could be something else, and mental illness. So when you have addictions present, you're going to see those in general. On the other side, these are the positive things that tend to not be there when people are suffering from addictions. This is spiritual well-being. You could also call this existential well-being, physical health and emotional health. So let's look at what happens to the patients in treatment on these negative attributes. Now, what you're looking at here, I'm not going to go too much into it. On the x-axis, you've got time. So 1 is when they arrive at treatment, and then each subsequent point is a couple of months. On the y-axis, vertical there, you've got predicted scores. They're standardized on tests. So 1 is a standard deviation, so that's quite a big jump. 1 is a big jump, or -1. So this is looking at mental illness, and you can see basically a big dip, which just sort of plateaus a little and then steadily down. So past a standard deviation, decrease in symptoms of mental illness. Now we look at craving, again, usually for a drug. The pattern is like almost identical. It's almost the same, it's just stronger. There's a stronger decrease. And then we tack on the third one, which is stress. We could be measuring the same thing. It looks identical. The models are almost the same. And this is really, really a huge decrease, like 2 standard deviations. You can think of this as, if we modelled Takiwasi patients, what would you be most likely to see? This. On the positive side of things, let's look at how they fare. In that sense, we're going to see the reverse movement. So we're going to see increases. And the emotional health up like that, that's huge. I haven't showed the normative data, like comparing them to particular countries, but on this one, it's like starting way, way below the United States average on emotional health and coming up to about, say, normal, we call normal. Spirituality is an interesting one. You'd think it would be like higher, yeah? As people are drinking ayahuasca and they're in a religious context in many cases. But you see this increase and then a plateau and maybe even a drop at the end. There's actually an interesting explanation for that. That test is split into 2 different things, and there's a tension at the end. The existential well-being, which is not put in terms of God or anything like that, seems to keep increasing, but the religious part for many patients drops off at the end. So that doesn't seem to sustain for everyone. One is when they first arrived at treatment. So that's the beginning. And then each number is a couple of months, let's say. So it's the progression throughout treatment. And then, okay, we look at physical health as well. Yeah, you get this increase, a little dip in the middle, but it still never goes back down to where they started. And that kind of makes sense because the treatment's pretty heavy duty in terms of the amount of plants that people, it's a strain on the body. But if we look at this is one question that comes out of the physical health test. And it's just asking the patients, right now, how would you consider your health at this exact moment compared to a year ago? That's it, that's the question. The first block of results is what people say when they arrive at treatment. So they've just got there, yeah, about a little under half are like, it's already a bit better, but the other half, or a bit more than the other half, are like either the same or their health is on a downward trajectory, it's like getting worse. If you keep asking that question throughout treatment, you ask it to them, every couple of months, you get this. You get a total shift over to better. No one says their health is worse after being in the centre. No one. It doesn't come up, some's the same. So all that's happened is everyone that said they were the same or worse has just said, yeah, okay, I'm feeling better. This is a subjective perception of health. It doesn't necessarily correlate to some sort of biological reality, but it's highly likely. And the last one, I'll just do this one really quickly. This is like neuropsychological functioning. So you can just think of this in terms of like brain performance, how people's brains are performing. And it's the same thing. How were they when they got there and how are they functioning in the middle of treatment? Along the bottom there, you've got immediate memory, visualization, language, and attention. They're all increasing, but this is not statistically significant, so you wouldn't be accepted for publication. But delayed memory, yes, you get this huge increase in the ability to recall information. And that category limit basically means that the patients have shifted from, on average, when they get there, they're like below normal. But during treatment, in terms of their delayed memory, it becomes average. They make a complete qualitative leap in terms of the test to another level. So that's enough about the statistical measurement side of things, about what happens with patients. I want to talk a little bit about how these sort of medical worlds can be bridged together, right? Because we've got these impressive results, and I think a lot of the change actually comes from the side of traditional medicine. I think that's where is the catalyst for most of these changes. But how can we incorporate that into a Western model? This really is a basic idea that underpins Western health. Your body is a machine. You can include the mind in that as well if you want, but it just gets reduced to a brain. If it's broken, you put something into it, a drug, or you change something physically. You give it surgery. And this is actually highly successful in a lot of different cases. It works for a lot of things, but I think now we're running into certain things where this doesn't work so well. Addiction is one of them. Contrast that medical model with this one. This is a painting by Pablo Amaringo, who's now passed on. This is actually a depiction of his, what he called a spiritual heart operation. So he had drunk ayahuasca before he became an ayahuasquero. In the vision, a medical doctor comes and cuts his chest open and fixes his heart, and for him it fixed his actual real physical heart problem. So the body as a machine is still there, still pumping blood and doing all these things, but around it is the reason I put this up. There's all these spiritual beings and this whole world of entities and things and energies that are there. They're just a part and parcel of this world of doing medicine, and they go along with it, and they need to be dealt with in whatever way is necessary. So the important thing is that the previous world really is learnt by books. This is not learnt through books. This is learnt through a direct connection with nature, so taking plants in a particular way to gain this knowledge, although there may be other ways, but this is just talking about sort of Peruvian tradition. Now, just quickly, within that world of entities and spirits and things, there are good things and there's bad things. And this is not really that strange of an idea. If you think about the natural world, we have forces on both sides. Now, I've got 2 quotes here that I think sort of exemplify the difference between these 2 models, Western and traditional. So this is about a healer in the 1970s in Iquitos, before ayahuasca was as well known as it is. So it says, during an ayahuasca session, forces of evil are present in the room and the healer feels the desperation of patients everywhere. A wise healer has to have his own defenses, good forces that hover around him. The session is like a battlefield and one can easily become sick. This is like the idea of the curandero. He's taking the energy out and he's not well trained and it goes into him, this kind of thing. Contrast that with this quote from Walter Cannon, famous physiologist from Harvard. He says, Aborigines are human beings so primitive, so superstitious, and so ignorant that they're bewildered strangers in a hostile world. Instead of knowledge, they have a fertile and unrestricted imagination which fills their environment with all manner of evil spirits capable of affecting their lives disastrously. So this is Cannon talking about Indigenous people en masse. Basically, imaginative children. That's the idea that comes out of this. And no one, this is probably not said so bluntly anymore, but I think this is the basic idea that still underpins Western science. So the things that, medicine anyway, it may be changing now, but okay, so we have these two worlds. Can they be connected together? We've got all this scientific and medical interest now in ayahuasca and traditional medicines. How do we fit them together? Well, I want to go back to the biopsychosocial model and put it in those terms. There are actually two versions of this model. Okay, so we have biopsychosocial, but spiritual experience, so we've got to put it into the model. It has to be in there. On the left-hand side, spiritual is an attribute of your mind. It's something that could be pragmatically useful in your life to have it, but it's just something in your head. So in terms of medicine, this can be explained in different ways across the biopsychosocial model. It could just be a neural process like the God center in your brain. It's a mental property. It's a subjective feeling that you have when you're feeling something spiritual. There you go. Psychology. Anthropology. It's a cultural belief. Well, I believe it because he believes it. It's like that. We all think like that. This is a biopsychosocial spiritual model that is specific to the West. The model on the right is what you would find in Takiwasi and is more closer to, say, a shamanic understanding. In this model, the spiritual world is an ontological category. It exists. It's just there, and it's something that's got to be dealt with. And this is, particularly, you'd find this in Takiwasi, although it's not an invention of Takiwasi. It's actually fairly standard. What's happening now, if you take practices that originate in the right-hand model, even though maybe they didn't talk about biopsychosocial, but in the right-hand model of an actual objective spiritual world, and you transpose them into the left-hand model, let's say a clinical trial for ayahuasca where the traditional practice is irrelevant. In fact, we take them out because we don't want them. We're just testing the substance. Or maybe we'll play some music. What you're actually doing is not bridging worlds, you're erasing one. You're erasing traditional practice and replacing it with something else. This maybe is okay, but the question really is whether the practitioner's actions, talking about someone who's been trained, are adaptive and functional and do useful things within that context. That's really the only question that can be tested. That's the pragmatic question. But that you can't ask this if this avenue of inquiry is closed off by philosophical assumptions, or if, let's say, professionally objectionable material is erased from study. Yeah, we want to study ayahuasca, we don't want to talk about spirits. It's a little embarrassing from a medical point of view, Western medical point of view. We don't want to bring that in. So, to my mind, I'll wrap this up. It's an open question that really requires sort of in-depth field work, a lot of qualitative works to start off with, and I think the acceptance of an actual true medical pluralism. So this is not like an overwriting of traditions, like to take the plants, oh yeah, thanks, and we've got it from here. We really need to seriously look into them and examine them, and therefore take them as something more than a historical curiosity or just an arbitrary cultural form, but look deeply into what it actually is. Okay, thank you.
Nicholas Langlitz has recently suggested that to really tease out all the different factors influencing the effects of psychedelics, we need to conduct culture-controlled trials as opposed to placebo-controlled trials. And I'm not completely sure if I've got the idea, but I think it's something like, manipulate the kind of cultural context as a variable. And so look at, try and hold everything else the same as much as you can. So I guess dose and substance and all that sort of thing, but look at what effect different contexts have on the outcomes. So I wonder what you think about that.
Well, actually that came up in a recent discussion. We were talking about the idea of a clinical trial with ayahuasca, and I was trying to argue for to bring in a traditional setting. And this was seen to be something that needed to be controlled for, like to measure it and play around with it. I guess my concern with that is how do you choose what you're doing and what's safe? In many times, to just say, oh, we're going to try this variable X or Y, it might not be congruent with what's considered to be safe in the practices where they came from. So I think that's an issue. It's a difficult one to merge, because there's like experimental control, and then on the other side there's the practical realities of using ayahuasca in this setting. We do these things for this reason.
Hey, I was just wondering if you think that ayahuasca or this style of treatment is kind of practical or realistic in a like a public health setting. So I work in addiction, and I have in Australia for several years,
Right.
And something that we see is we see incredible demand on these systems. All of these things, they're like really, really lovely kind of notions, and I just I wonder, given like the size of the population and the scale of the problem, if this is actually, given the rate that the world is growing, is this actually a realistic treatment approach?
There's so many things that become potential problems, when you start talking about in a public health setting. One interesting point, I think, and it goes back to the previous question as well, is that the people going to Takiwasi don't actually share a culture. They're not sort of all from the same place. They're coming from all around. Okay, a lot of South American patients, but Europeans as well. They're not necessarily plant people in the first place. So I do think it could work in reality, but the actual regulatory hurdles of bringing it to place are, I think, very difficult.
Thank you very much.